How's it going, guys? Shizukat's here, and welcome to part 1 of my Varkyn Cup guide. The Varkyn Cup is just around the corner, and it's looking to be the toughest arena yet, so today we'll be getting into who and what you should be bringing to take on this new challenge. But of course, we have a couple quick notes before we get into the meat of the video. First off, as usual, Arena is extremely high-level content, and some of you will not be able to defeat it immediately when it gets released. However, since Arena is permanent content, feel free to come back later after you have higher levels, better equipment, or maybe just some new additions to your roster. As far as recommended levels to take on the fight, I recommend for 4-star units to be at least level 65 to 70 with at least Awakening 1, and for 5-star units you'll probably want to be at least around level 80 to 85. Secondly, this video will obviously contain spoilers for the fight, as we'll be going over certain details of the fight in order to justify the reasons why we take certain characters. If you want to go into the fight blind, close this video and come back later if you need to. Let's start by going over what defensive equipment we should bring. As Varkyn is a scholar, a majority of the damage you're going to be taking throughout the fight will be magic damage. As such, you should be loading up your units with hood and robe defensive equipment to mitigate as much of that magic damage as possible. As usual, HP is the best stat for improving the survivability of your characters, rather than using accessories that give additional defensive stats alone. Within the last month, we've gotten the Adventurer's Emblem, which gives 200 HP and 200 HP regen per turn, which can be obtained by defeating the level 80 Adventurer in the 3rd section of the Bravely Default dungeon. That NPC can be found here. I'll have a video up on the channel soon detailing this fight as well, so look out for that. Dragon Scarves are typically best suited on your units that will be spamming their skills the most and staying in the front line, while the best Beastly Scarves will want to be put on the unit behind your regen caster, since they're never going to be the recipient of the regen. While this fight has a special interaction, let's call it, that makes regen quite a bit worse than in the previous 2 arenas, it's still a good idea to bring a regen caster along, but we'll touch up more on that later. Now moving on to the character recommendations. In order to determine which characters are the best to bring, we must first take a look at the enemy weaknesses. Compared to Tikilen and Glossum, who had certain weaknesses which all of the enemies were weak to, there is no universal weakness among the 3 enemies in the Varkyn Cup, which makes tackling this fight a bit more difficult. Varkyn himself is weak to swords, staves, and ice. His Scholar ad on the left is weak to swords, spears, bows, and light, and his Dancer ad on the right is weak to spears, bows, tomes, and ice. As far as common weaknesses between the 3, Varkyn and the Scholar share a sword weakness, Varkyn and the Dancer share an ice weakness, and the Scholar and Dancer share spear and bow weaknesses. Ideally, we would like to target the common weaknesses to determine who are the best characters to bring along. Also, as one more note before we get into the characters, we need to talk about Varkyn's gimmick. Once both of Varkyn's ads have been eliminated, or once Varkyn reaches about 50% maximum HP, he'll summon a Wisp. The Wisp has a mechanic where it will copy one of Varkyn's weaknesses, while putting up a counter that activates whenever its weakness is struck by one of your units. This counter can inflict upwards of 4,000 light damage, and the weakness is also hidden until you strike it. This means that you absolutely do not want to be using random target or AoE skills once the Wisp has set up its counter, unless you want to risk instantly losing a unit. We'll be taking this into account when we consider what units or skills to bring. Let's start our unit recommendations with my picks for the MVP units. First up is Fior. She's an extremely powerful and versatile physical attacker, being able to use many different sword skills depending on the current state of the fight. I recommend bringing along her 3-hit single target, 2-hit AoE, and of course, Collapse Charge for its powerful nuking ability and defense down debuff. On the magical side, the MVP unit is, of course, Sophia. The skills I recommend bringing on Sophia are her 3-hit single target and 1-hit AoE. Her final skill is kind of a wildcard slot. I personally brought along her 1-hit tome with magic defense down on my sample composition, combining it with Noelle's elemental break to cap 30% magic defense down. Hypothetically, you could bring Sophia's ice defense down skills, but since they're random target, I chose not to include them in my setup to avoid potentially killing a run once the Wisp has its counter up. Taking over Teo's spot in the MVP tier for this arena is Agnes from the Bravely collab. She has access to AoE regen just like him, but also has Staff to attack Varkyn's weakness and Light Magic to attack the Scholar's weakness. However, the main reason Agnes is significantly better than Teo in this particular arena is because she has an AoE heal on top of her AoE regen. The reason that's so important is because the Wisp mentioned earlier will also dispel all ally buffs at the end of every turn, including regen, even before it has a chance to heal you. Having a regular heal to use in the back half of the fight is very important and helps keep her relevant in all phases, making her the prime choice for a healer in my opinion. As always, having a debuffer to reduce the enemy attack power is extremely valuable. Viola is the premier debuffer with anti-attack, anti-guard, and double wide burst. Kurtz is a great budget alternative with access to anti-attack. One additional unit you could bring along to serve as a debuffer in this fight is Noelle, whose elemental break is fantastic for debuffing both magic and magic defense from a single enemy, and allowing certain characters debuffs, such as the aforementioned Sophia, to get a significantly increased duration, since Elemental Break's duration is increased based on how many boost points you use. While he isn't confirmed to be coming out, Cyrus is a character that many members of the community, including myself, think will be the unit coming out this upcoming Wednesday. As a powerful scholar who can use ice, he's the perfect candidate to bring to the Varkyn Cup, and it would make a lot of sense for Square Enix to release him right now. While nothing is set in stone, just know that if Cyrus does end up being released, he's definitely an MVP tier unit for the fight. Next, let's move on to some of our other attacking options. For warriors, Idea and Corrin are both very serviceable physical attackers. Idea has 3-hit single target sword, while Corrin has 2-hit single target and powerful nuking options. While both of these units have access to light magic, since the only enemy in the fight that's weak to light is also weak to swords, there's no real reason to bring anything other than their sword skills. In the 4-star department, Sigrid and Trish are both great units you could bring along, as they both have access to a 3-hit single target sword, as well as a 1-hit sword AoE that can be used to hit both Varkyn and the Scholar ad in the earlier stages of the fight. Cardona is an excellent unit for taking out the ads, having a 3-hit spear AoE. While she has ice skills that could theoretically be useful once the ads are eliminated, the fact that her ice skills are a 2-hit AoE and a 4-hit random target can potentially make them liabilities once the Wisp has been summoned and it puts up its counter. You could potentially run her with the purpose of attacking during the first half and then swapping her to the backline for the latter half, and start using her for utility such as using SP Gift to recharge your other attackers or healers. I generally do not recommend going for taunts in this fight, as there are multiple enemy attacks that are multi-hit random target, and your taunt unit could potentially take a ton of punishment if all of the enemy attacks are getting focused on them. The main 4-star merchant that I'd recommend is Helga. She has 1-hit spear AoE, which can hit both of the ads, and also has 2-hit ice single target that can be used in the later phases once Varkyn is alone. Her full HP automatic taunt passive can also sometimes come in a bit handy for keeping squishier allies a little bit safer when the enemy uses their multi-hit abilities, since the first hit will always be directed to Helga as long as she's at full HP. For hunters, Honnet and Scarecrow are powerful units that can be used to wipe out the ads very quickly with their multi-hit AoE bow skills. However, they aren't nearly as useful once the ads are wiped out, since Varkyn himself isn't weak to bows. While Honnet could bring Lind along to act as a sword attacker in the late game, the fact that Lind's sword mode is AoE could potentially play right into the Wisp's weakness and cause Honnet to get exploded for free. As a 4-star option, we have Lucetta. With 3-hit bow single target, 1-hit bow AoE that inflicts defense down, and access to ice magic, she's a unit that has usefulness at all stages. However, her only ice multi-hit option is an AoE, which means you'd probably have to take her 1-hit ice to stay safe. Having a greater number of multi-hits is very important when you're getting down to the final stages of the fight, as you're going to want to be breaking Varkyn as quickly and as often as possible within reason. So if you had to choose between Lucetta and another 4-star like Helga, who has 2-hit ice single target, I'd rather take Helga first. Clerics with burst healing can be very valuable in this fight once the Wisp is up and regen no longer works. Millard and Ramona are easily the top 2 options for this fight, due to both having access to a team-wide magic defense up buff to reduce the enemy team's damage as much as possible, in addition to their burst heal skills, of course. Even though your buffs will be getting erased at the end of every turn once the Wisp is up, if the character applying the buff is fast enough, you can get the damage reduction for at least the current turn. On the offensive side, both have staves that can be used to whack away at Varkyn's shields in the back half of the fight, while Millard has light magic which can be used on the Scholar, and Ramona has ice magic to use on Varkyn or the Dancer. Additionally, Ramona's HP regen passive can be very useful in the later stages of the fight to provide a bit of extra healthiness in an environment where your regen buffs are no longer working. Hasumi is another viable healer option. She has light multi-attack that can be useful against the Scholar ad, but lacks staff attacking that clerics can use on Varkyn. She also comes with a team-wide defensive buff similar to Millard and Ramona. While Teo isn't fantastic in this fight due to regen being negated throughout the back half, he does still have a way to heal your units via his single target heal. Throughout the first half of the fight, just cast your regen and go about business as usual, and then switch to using the single ally heal to top up units in the back half. At this point, any healing is good healing, especially when Varkyn's powerful spells late into the fight can sometimes deal around 80 to 90% of your unit's max HP with just a single cast. Buffers like Lynette can be useful throughout the fight as long as they're fast enough. Even though the buffs are being dispelled at the end of every turn, if the buffer acts early in the turn, they can boost the firepower of all attacking units to deal quite a bit of damage. Lynette in particular is able to buff your allies with both her skill and passive, resulting in a huge boost of power, and she can use her fan debuff to reduce magic defense and make units like Sophia hit even harder. One unit that you guys might be surprised to find out that I've excluded from my unit recommendations is Azlight. Despite being a mainstay in ice compositions, her main attacking option is a 3-hit random target, a potential liability considering the Wisp. While she could apply ice defense down to set up more damage for strong ice attackers like Sophia, I'd rather use my utility slots for units that can debuff the enemy magic stat, like Viola, Kurtz, and Noelle, since the enemy team can do some pretty nasty damage. Alright, next, let's take a look at a couple sample compositions. The first one, as usual, is going to be the team that I used to clear the fight on my JP account for the first time. There are quite a few units here that aren't available yet in English, but the roles are basically the same. Fior is my primary sword attacker for hitting Varkyn and killing the Scholar ad, while Trish is brought as a secondary attacker. Liana, the cleric in the second row, is my primary ice attacker for hitting Varkyn and killing the Dancer ad, while the backline Scholar Kenneth is the backup. Finally, Uni, the hunter in the fourth row, is a bow unit with multi-hit AoE for knocking down the shields of both ads, before swapping back to Trish once the ads were dealt with. Anya serves as the primary healer, with access to both regen and burst healing. Lynette serves as both a buffer and debuffer, and Viola brings both anti-attack and anti-guard. I'm honestly surprised at my lack of defensive buffs or secondary healing in this party, but my first clear was with level 65 defensive equipment as well, so that probably made a bit of difference. For a more EN accurate team, I put together this team composition, which you guys have been seeing playing throughout the video. Cardona is extremely useful early on in the fight for knocking down both of the ad's shields with her 3-hit spear AoE. At the same time, Sophia can hit the Dancer and Varkyn, while Fior can hit the Scholar and Varkyn. Once the ads are down, Cardona swaps to the back row to allow Ramona to put in some work with her ice abilities, while Agnes maintains the burst healing. If you were to run Teo in this comp instead of Agnes, Ramona can instead be brought to the front line to cast burst heals and make sure your units are topped up as much as possible, while Teo can use his single target heals. However, this will result in a bit of lost DPS since Ramona will be using her turns on healing instead of attacking with ice. Viola and Noelle are brought to pair up their debuffs. Sophia's magic defense debuff is unneeded if you have Viola, but it can put in a lot of work if you don't have Viola and end up using a different unit such as Kurtz. And that wraps up my first part of my Varkyn guide. There are definitely some pretty unique hoops to jump through when it comes to taking on the Varkyn Cup, and hopefully this video was helpful in picking out which units will give you the best chance of victory. Stay tuned for part 2, where I'll be talking about the mechanics of the fight itself, as well as showing off a sample fight. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them down in the comment section below. And until next time, this has been CheezyCats. See ya!